customers turn to 30, go to 300, then that's an inflection point. Then you pay attention to tech debt, and your only focus is on keep it going in the right direction, upward. Like if your servers are going to catch fire tomorrow at noon, if you don't get more servers, fix that right now. You don't care about anything else. Focus, focus, focus. Because initially you had no customers, which means you had no income, which means you had no risk whatsoever. You're just experimenting. And then when you start to see that change, now the entire focus is on keep it going, keep it going, keep it going, keep it going. So you can continue to grow that market share and get income. And when your next inflection point takes place is when it starts to level off. The new adoptions are not as rapid or growing as quickly as they were. Now you know you're headed towards the stage where you want to milk the crap out of it. Because now you have to get rid of all the technical debt so that it's just dirt simple for anyone to keep breathing. Because that's what you want to do, because that is what's going to fund your next experiment. Yeah, I had some fun learning that stuff and learning how to articulate it.
And I did start recording halfway through, just so the people who watch us on YouTube later on feel like they're walking into the middle of a movie, and maybe some of them go, you know, it sounds like Bob Allen's talking about Kent Speck's Triple X.
And they would be correct. Excellent. Rick, I love your avatar or background or whatever it is. Right?
Yeah, that's the Grand Inquisitor from Venture Brothers.
Excellent. All right. So, Dustin, are we as here as we're going to be?
I think this is where we're going to be, and as people come and go, that's all right. Just as I'm sure you're going to explain about your around the world event later on. I was talking to Brock about that earlier. People, it's okay to come and go. So I'll do the quick introduction here. This is the Iowa.NET user group. I'm Dustin Thorstensen, and I'm very happy to introduce a friend of mine, Bob Allen. I got to know Bob when we were both out in Detroit. He's still there. I am not. But Bob is going to be talking to us about BDD and why you need to be doing it. Our sponsor for tonight's meeting is Robert Half, and I don't see if anybody from Robert Half had joined us tonight. Is anybody here from Robert Half, or would anybody like to speak on behalf of Robert Half?
Oh, you couldn't pass that up, couldn't you?
Well, I see Carter, who works for a competitor, just biting his trying to do his best there. All right. Well, Robert Half has been a long time supporter for us and definitely like them. So, all right. I don't really have much more to add from that. So, Bob, I'll let you introduce yourself and do the thing that you do.
Thank you, Dustin. Great to see you again. Of course, it's been, God, easily 2 years.
You were shaven, I think, the last time I saw you. You had a clear chin.
Not any time in the last 4 or 5 years, I don't think. I may have been trimming, but not shaving. Oh, no, not for a while. So I got my agile religion, so to speak, back around 2010 when I started playing around on a gig where I was the director of software development, and we had something that was going to bring money into the department. So I wanted to do it right. And I'd heard about this thing. I started reading the Kanban book, and I thought, this looks really interesting. Let's try this with the client. And oh my God, it was a success. They loved it. We loved it. My developers loved it. And it was like, oh crap, I got to find out everything there is to know about this agile stuff. Kanban's just part of it. And I did. I was in the Bay Area at the time where I got the chance to learn from a lot of really smart people. And I still know most of those people. And talk to them on a fairly regular basis. But from there, I decided, all right, I've been doing it wrong for decades. I need to amend for my sins. So I decided I wanted to become a Scrum Master, and I got that out of the way. And then, like most Scrum Masters that say, okay, I got my cert now. Now I want to become a coach, right? That's what an awful lot of people do. And I actually ran coaching circles for a number of years where that was the most common pattern of someone that just got their cert. They had no experience, really wet behind the ears, but they wanted to figure out how to get to be a coach. And I understand the aspiration, but it's like, hey, get some experience first. And that's basically what I told him. So anyway, I had the very good fortune to actually have a coaching gig first with Lean Dog, who's based in Ohio, but the gig wasn't where their offices are. It was in Columbus, Ohio. And I got to do some very cool things with ACS, which is a American Chemical Services. It has like the world's biggest database on every substance, man-made or otherwise. And I actually helped them build a Kanban board. And they were talking about this guy. I thought I knew everyone that was there in their office. They kept mentioning someone named George. I said, well, who's George? Oh, George is the guy who knows how to run RoboHelp, and nothing actually gets shipped until the RoboHelp is complete for it. And I looked at the Kanban, one column at a time. And I said, where's George? And they said, oh my God, we forgot George. I said, score, I win. So that's how I became a coach. My first real engagement. So I've been doing this for a long time. And when I got to the Ann Arbor area, first time I'd ever been to the Midwest, which I had to laugh about, Midwest my ass. I'm still east of the Mississippi. Come on, West, be serious. Once I got there. Hello. Go away.
Go ahead.
Go away.
Okay.
Siri wanted to talk to me. Wow. Okay, so once I got there, I had been to a couple of things called code retreats. And I don't know if everyone on this call knows what a code retreat is, but basically it's a day-long thing. You get lunch. It's always better than programmer pizza, and it's always free. But within that, you pair with a different individual, a pair partner, a different one every single hour throughout the course of a day. So it's intentionally designed to maximize, turn up the crank to 11 for learning. And I had been to a few of those, and I thought, this is an amazing format. Why isn't anyone doing this? And then I looked in the mirror. I said, you jackass, why aren't you doing it? And so I started doing it in 2013. I got sponsors, the whole 9 yards. And oh my God, it was so much fun. And then around 2009, early 2020, pandemic got serious. But I had an advantage because in late 2019, Woody Zuhl reached out to me and about a dozen other people and said of himself, I have a problem. We have a conference in spring, as you know, because you've all been attendees at that conference for the last 2 or 3 years. That's why I'm reaching out to you. And I have no idea how to do a conference online. I don't even know how to do mob programming online. So let's experiment and actually figure out how to do it really well. And that's what we did for like 2 solid weeks, for 2 and 3 and 4 hours at a time. And because Woody Zuhl is an international quality speaker, my contact list went international like overnight. And as a result, the things that I do which you can find on Eventbrite, called Code Craft Saturdays and Sundays. Happens twice a month, excuse me, every month, are mob programming with people all over the world. And we frequently get anywhere from 3 to 4 to sometimes 6 continents, people signing up. That's what I do. It's what I live and breathe. And oh my God, is it fun. And I'll leave towards the end the thing I'm doing in November. November is special because as code retreats go, that's the annual, only once a year, global day of code retreat. That's what it's been for literally decades, a decade. This year, I really thought hard about this term global day. And I ask you, people on this call, how long is a day in your experience?
24 hours.
How about if you look at it from the entire planet? Not just where you're sitting. Now, how long is it? You got to unmute.
Would that be about 48 hours then?
That would be 48 hours on the money because it happens 23 more times after it happened in one place. So that's the premise for a 48-hour, one-day exercise. It's literally the same calendar day, but just in different places. So where do days always begin? Well, to the west of the international date line, right? Where's the biggest population center? Probably New Zealand. There's not a lot of people on the islands. So if you start in New Zealand and you go all the way to midnight on Saturday, the 5th, guess what? It's still Saturday, 1 hour to the east of there, or the west of there, excuse me. And again, and again, and again, and again. So guess what? When Saturday begins in New Zealand, those Kiwis aren't awake yet. It's like, oh, dark 30. But we are. And technically, this is like a riff on, is it beer 30 yet somewhere on the planet? It's that thinking. So here we are in the United States. When does it start being Saturday in New Zealand, where it first becomes Saturday? The answer is around 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening for us. And so it's Saturday. Let's do a code retreat because we're all remote anyway. And where else are people going to be awake? Well, they're going to be awake in Europe, of course. We know this. They're going to be awake in Brazil because they even stick further out into the ocean than we do. So we can have some fun starting even before our local calendar says that it's Saturday. That's the premise for a 48-hour, let's have some fun doing a code retreat with people all over the planet. So there, I got that out of the way. Now we can get into behavior-driven development. So behavior-driven development is how I usually say it. Just like when I say TDD, I don't just say test-driven development. I say test-driven development, because is it about the test or is it about the fact that you're driving code into existence? Well, those of us who know TDD know that it's the latter. It's all about incremental, organic growing of the code, one test at a time, driven by that test. And then the next test, and then the next test, and so on and so on and so on. What does that do for us? When you're about 12 tests in, and you're trying to satisfy your 13th test, and you break something, how long does it take to find out? Next to nothing, because your tests are fast. And those first 12 tests are going to smack you upside the head to say, hey, you broke something you didn't mean to. And that's the value proposition, whether it's TDD or BDD. So you say, well, okay, so Bob, you're telling us that BDD is the same thing as TDD, sort of. How many people are aware of the fact that there are two schools? Technically, there's actually 3 or 4, 2 schools of test-driven development. Okay, Dustin wins a Cupid doll. Chicago and Detroit are the first school. And by the way, TDD literally started in Detroit because Chrysler Comprehensive Compensation Program was something that he was a consultant on, sitting across the desk from some executive vice president saying, here's what my recommendations are. And the executive vice president said to him, great, you are going to do it. He said, no, you don't understand. I'm a consultant. She says, no, you don't understand. You're either going to lead it or you're not going to get paid. Oh, well, in that case, and that's how he ended up getting into a position where he created this thing called extreme programming, which happened to have included S-Unit. For those of you who don't know, S-Unit is the unit testing framework for Smalltalk, because that's what they were writing it in at the time. And J-Unit didn't exist until a plane ride coming back from Europe, where Kent Beck was sitting next to, forgive me, I don't remember who it was that was a Java expert. I think it might have been, oh God, wrote the other refactoring book that I'm trying to think of that I can't think of the name of. Anyway, they invented J-Unit, literally wrote out the first of it on a plane ride coming back from Europe. Yes, sir.
Bob, I did want to interject real quick. Just as this talk will be on our YouTube channel, earlier this year, we had Chet Hendrickson talking about the C3 project. So if you want to learn more about the C3 project, Chet gives us a wonderful history about it, which includes a really great point about him talking about story points. He has
You would know about it.
Yes, he tells you why story points are bad. So definitely something worth looking at. Back to you.
Excellent interjection. Thank you for that. That's a great addition. Yeah, and Chet, I didn't even realize, is right here in River City. He lives probably within 10 miles of me.
In Michigan?
Yeah.
I thought Chet was down in the south. I thought he was in or maybe he just kept his accent from the south.
Farmington Hills.
Really?
Yeah. I'm not even in Ann Arbor. I'm in Farmington Hills. And
we
he's
got George Dinwiddie out there. There's a lot of great minds out in that area.
yeah.
Very
Well, I don't know if George is still out here or not, but
okay.
Anyway, good interjection. Thank you for that. That was very valuable. So let's see, where the hell was I? TDD is, or BDD is very like TDD. Here are the ways in which it's different. The Chicago and Detroit school of TDD basically is bottom up. You start at the lowest possible layer and you work your way up to the outermost exposed to humans, exposed to outer actors layer. And with the London school, which is the other major school of test-driven development, you do the opposite. You start from the human behavioral experience, or whoever the actor is. It may not be a human, it may be another system. But from that point of view, how is the thing you're doing supposed to behave? And it doesn't matter who the actor is, or human or otherwise. There's behaviors. And behaviors means that there's going to be a domain specific language, a DSL. And when you are capturing the behavior, it behooves you to capture the domain specific language, the language of that problem domain. If someone is saying that you're interviewing to get the quote unquote requirements, better known as a wish list, because stories are always negotiable, right? They're always specific, they're always negotiable, and a whole bunch of other things from that acronym. But negotiable is the number one for me. When you're listening to them and you're taking notes, you can literally be taking notes in the very simplest possible language, given, when, then. If you've heard given, when, then you know what it means theoretically. But did you know that in unit testing, there's exactly the same structure, only it's called AAA. Does anyone know what AAA stands for? I'll bet Dustin does because he's smiling. So instead of given, you can say arrange, like arrange the universe or the subset of the universe that you care about for the purposes of this test. And then you act on it, which is an awful lot like when I do this thing to produce this observable outcome. Well, that's the second A in AAA. And the third A is assert, our asserts library that we all know and love, right? If we write unit test, we sure as hell know about the asserts library in whatever language. So arrange, act, assert. It's the same thing as given, when, then. Now, I got some really good advice from none other than the guy who invented given, when, then language. He said, don't start with the given. Start with the outcome. How are you gonna know whether or not you got the thing that's supposed to happen? Start with the then, or the assert, if you will. Then to say, in order to get that outcome, what did you have to do to trigger it? Now you're stepping up to the when. And once you've done that, well, what universe of things need to be true to be able to invoke whatever the method is or get that kind of a reaction? Well, that's the universe you've got to create with the given. So if you do given, when, then completely ass backwards, it's easier to start out with what is the outcome that you plan to observe and then back it up from there. And that came from Dan North. That was his original thinking. Because he's the guy that invented BDD in general, but it wasn't Cucumber. That was Aslak Helisoy and Company. Okay, so if you want to actually do some Cucumber or see some Cucumber, I think I might be able to accommodate you. Because it so happens I was doing some earlier this evening. And so I'm going to show you some, and I'm going to start sharing my screen if I can get back to Zoom land. And here we are in, I put it up here and then switch my window.
Siri, share Bob's screen. Wow. Worked.
So this is an interesting picture, but I don't think it's the one we're looking for.
Still a good picture though.
Yeah. Sad to that guy passed.
Yeah.
All right. So here we are.
I actually got to see David Hussman when he was in the band. I was like 16 years old working at a ballroom for slavery.
Oh my God, while he was still a punk rocker.
Yeah, yeah.
That was his claim to fame. But
Yeah.
from that experience, he was able to authoritatively comment on most companies wanting to hire quote unquote rock stars.
Yeah.
And he said, I can tell you from firsthand experience, by and large, rock stars are not nice people. You really don't want to hire them. So are you now seeing something that looks sort of black and white and yellow and is called Cyber Dojo something?
Yep.
All right. And you're seeing this thing that says feature and rule and scenario outline. Yes, because I'm not seeing a border on it.
Nope, you're good.
Okay, good. Thank you for confirming. So the purple stuff here, line 2, line 3, line 4, line 5, and 14. Yeah, all the purple stuff. Those are reserved words, just like in any linter in any language. But what the heck is the language here? The language, you may be surprised to learn, is something called Gherkin. You say, Gherkin? What the hell is that? Well, let me ask you a related question. This is written in Java. Not this particular file, the feature file, but the code is written in Java. But here's a question. Does Java by itself actually do anything? Is it active? What does Java, the language, do? It defines keywords. It defines syntax. And it defines conventions like the one true way of using brackets versus the Kernighan and Ritchie style of bracketing and things like that. It doesn't insist on those sorts of things, but that's what it's defining. But it doesn't do anything. It's inert. It defines the fact that public and class and static and string are reserved words. That's why they're purple here. But it has an active participant in Java C, the compiler, that actually turns this that you're looking at on the screen right now into bytecodes that will run on any JVM, no matter what the architecture of that particular machine is. Well, Gherkin, which is what you see here, has the same relationship with, there's no import here, step devs, this thing right here. This is the active part of Cucumber. It's that library that's responsible for the green stuff you see down here. The green stuff are reserved words in what it's looking for from this library. They're annotations. And the annotation says, I'm a macro, and I'm going to expect to find some string of characters and match the pattern. Did you notice we have this weird squiggly stuff in here? That's a pattern, and it's not regex. It's actually called Cucumber expressions. So when we feed it placeholder for an integer, it gives us placeholder for a string. And when Cucumber, the logic that's up here in this library, reads this feature file, it goes looking for a Java file like this one that uses this library, and then it goes looking for the @given for what it found right here and here. and it finds it right here. And what it does find it says, okay, whatever code you've got right after that in this macro, it's a public void method that in other languages would explicitly say, and I'm going to throw an error. I have the potential to throw an error. If I was to get this wrong, and I, for some reason, did something like the assert equals, because you know the asserts library, what they do is they throw errors. That's what they do when they get mad. And that's exactly what Cucumber is looking for. If I was to comment out line 13, line 18, and line 23, these tests would all pass no matter what shit I gave it. Because the only thing that makes Cucumber upset and makes it report a failed test is when an error is thrown, an error of a particular type. So if I did nothing in the body of these three methods on line 12, line 17, and line 22, the test would always come up green. Life is good. We're done here, right? But we don't do that because we know that that's the rules of the game. But here is how the magic happens. You can write things like this first one. It's very, very simple. It's very plain and spelled out, and it meets the, anyone know the WTF rule for reviewing code? You might have to go off mute if you want to answer that one. I'd love it if someone besides me answered that one.
I'm waiting.
Wow, no takers.
Are
It's
you
one of my
are you
favorite
referring
cartoons.
to the XKCD comment about the number of WTFs per minute?
And that's exactly the one. And actually, I think it might have happened before XKCD. But basically, if you're reading the code and what you're reading, like in the name of a class or in the name of a method, and then you start reading the body of the method and you go, what the hell? That's not good code. So the more WTFs per minute is a bad thing and less is better. So you should make your code read as clearly as this does, or as close to it as you can. So let's test that. Do we have good, clean code? Now, the only difference between this and this is that there's a shorthand technique that's enabled by Gherkin that says, instead of repeating this same thing over and over and over again, all of this stuff that's exactly the same, where the only thing that changes is the number and the what result is. Well, yeah, you can put that into a table down here and it'll be replaced by the column header, which matches the placeholder name up here, same thing. That's what's going on. It's just a shorthand that Gherkin makes available to you. So imagine for a moment that you're interviewing a customer or some proxy for a customer, a product owner, a business analyst, however far you get removed from the actual person who wants the thing. But it's the closest you've got to the person who wants the thing. If they start describing to you what it is that they need, and you listen attentively, and if you're doing object-oriented programming, what are you listening for in terms of English language terms, nouns, verbs? In object, in OOP, what do nouns generally become, especially if they're used a lot? I'm trying to get some participation here. People talk. By the way, if you hold down the space bar in Zoom, that toggles it off while you're holding it down. You don't have to find the mute button.
Bueller.
Anyone going to answer? Boy, you're a tough crowd.
I see we have Skip in the room, and it surprises me that Skip isn't talking.
So Skip, do you have an answer? And if the answer is, I don't know, totally cool. Nouns generally get turned into, in an OOP context, into class names. They're things. Object orientation means that you represent a thing, which is usually represented with a noun, in software. And the verbs tend to become the names of methods because they're the active stuff that goes on in the context of that object. So when you're listening to your subject matter expert, your proxy for a customer, you're listening for the nouns and the verbs. And you're probably about halfway to writing code, but you should restrain yourself from doing that. And instead, simply listen at a level that will add just enough structure to make it notable, and write the notes literally in a pencil or on your tablet or your whatever in given, when, then, given, when, then, given, when, then. And you go all Gojo Adzik and you say, I think I understand what you're saying. Could you give me an example of that? And then you keep doing that and you make notes given when this is the condition, when this is the trigger, then the result should be explicitly this, not some general rule. You see up on line 4 and on line 14, those are rules. They're general. They're not explicit. Line 5 and line 15 are general in this case because we're going to turn it into multiple examples because of a scenario outline. But that given or that scenario initially was an explicit use case saying, I expect to give it 5, I expect to get buzz. But I changed it because I was moving towards using scenario outlines. And I can still continue to do that, but we've only got a little less than 15 minutes remaining, so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But I wanted to show you how much flexibility there is in Gherkin, the language. Now, we're going to return to the imaginary Three Amigos session with the subject matter expert, whatever their actual title is. And we have with us a developer whose predilection is, how easy can I make this so that the person who wants the thing is happy? I'm probably going to do the happy path and be thinking along those lines. But if you've got the third member of a Three Amigos trio, that's the tester. And they are that one person on your team who can think of 12 ways to break almost anything. And they do it on a regular basis. That is the tester mindset. How many different ways can I break this stuff? How many questions have not been asked that need to be answered to be able to come up with a use case, a test? That's why you want those three mindsets: the person who wants the thing, the person who can actually write the code for the thing, and the person who can think of 12 ways to break whatever it is that the developer comes up with. And they should be in lockstep, helping one another. That's a healthy environment. So your subject matter expert is answering your questions and you're taking notes. Let's say you've got an hour allocated for doing this exercise where you're interrogating them, otherwise known as interviewing them. And you're getting some really good stuff. And about 10 or 15 minutes before the hour is up, you say to them, the person who wants the thing, you may notice that I've been taking notes on this and I haven't shared them with you with you yet. I'm going to change that right now, but I have, and I want to let you know, I've got just 2 questions. And the first question you're probably going to think is kind of funny or kind of ridiculous, but trust me, it's serious. My first question is, did I spell everything correctly? And now you're showing them what you wrote, given, when, then, given, when, then, given, when, then, one after another. And you're asking, do you understand what you said and how I just gave it a little tiny bit of structure? And if their head is nodding this way, well, that's a win. If they have any questions, you ask them, did I spell everything correctly? And when they kind of giggle, you say, well, actually, the reason that that's important to me is because your exact terms represent something called a domain-specific language. You're the expert in your domain. I'm not. I write code for all kinds of different domains. I want to make sure that your exact language is properly represented here, because I want your language, your terminology, to work its way into not just the names of the test and the terminology of the test, but actually into my code, so that the code actually represents exactly your thinking clearly. Because then me and anyone else on the development team will literally be on the same page with you and learning about your domain that you're an expert in. That's why it's important to do this silly thing like spelling things correctly and using them correctly in a sentence. And the second question is, based on what we've just talked about over this last 45 minutes or so, is this everything? And I know you'll probably think of 3 more things on the drive home or in the shower tomorrow or whatever, but based on what we've just talked about, is this complete? And is it completely understandable? Is it correct? And if the answer is yeah, okay, that's great. But the really, really golden answer is yeah. Oh, no, wait. That's not right. Change it this way. That's good. But then the other thing is, oh, wait. Now that I see all these, we didn't talk about blah, 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 blah. Golden, because you just learned earlier, perhaps even days earlier, about something they forgot to talk about. That is worth a lot. How did that come about? It came about because you are stretching yourself to be in their space, their subject matter expertise, and interrogating them in their space, their language. And because you've built that trust up, they're willing to say, oh, I forgot something. How about this case? And you get another case. And you now know that even before this 1-hour meeting is over. That is priceless. Now then, if you do what I just described, you literally interview your subject matter expert, customer, product owner, whatever they call themselves, it doesn't matter. You get reasonably good at doing this thing with Gherkin and behavior-driven development and interviewing them in the way that I just described and teasing out as much as you can from that 1 hour. And you get to where you can write code like what you see here. This is just the beginning of it. This is easy, but it's in direct response to this code, which, by the way, I'm going to do a little thing here that I show you real quickly. I'm going to actually Alt. You probably didn't know it could do this. No, I didn't want to do that. Thank you, Oxford Dictionary, but that's not what I wanted. Why aren't you drawing the line? Well, okay, I can do it that way. I can do it this way too. So what I was rather hoping for is that I'm commenting shit out. There we go. Okay, so that's all commented out. Now I don't have anything. If I run this right now, we're going to get a gift. You're going to be surprised. Tell me what you see down here on lines 24 and below. And does it look familiar? Huh. Where did that language come from? It came directly from our feature file that the Cucumber parser read. And it said, because you commented it out, I didn't find anything like that. So here, poor dumb programmer who doesn't know how to do this, let me hand it to you. And that's also golden. And every Cucumber implementation has a feature that will do that. SpecFlow has it. I think even Python has it. And certainly the Cucumber JVM has it, because you just saw it right here. So this is really easy for developers to get into. So I'm going to revert, which you probably didn't know that you could do in here. Revert like that. And now we're back right where we were. And I'll prove it by testing it. And we're green. So what I just did by way of demo was to show you that if we go, for instance, into the step definitions, look at line 1 and line 23. You already know how to do this stuff. The only thing that's different is the Cucumber stuff that's on 11 and 12 and on 16 and 17 and on 21 and 22. That's the only thing that's different. And Cucumber will give that to you. So this is dirt simple for you to do. But it gives you the extra advantage of having a communication with your subject matter expert, so that you are getting from the horse's mouth, so to speak, their terminology, their language, their concepts, and you can have a dialogue with them. Try never, ever, if you can possibly avoid it, to receive written specifications. Insert yourself into the dialogue by any means necessary and have actual conversations, and then capture it and then show it to them. Get it confirmed right then in the spot. And then when you get good at this, you can make a commitment the likes of which you would never dream of doing if you don't know how to do this. You can make a commitment like this, which I have done countless times. Thank you for confirming everything that we've got here is correct and that I've spelled it. Here's the commitment I will make to you. By this time tomorrow, what time is it? Yeah, it's that time. I will have checked in working code that passes most of these tests, depending on how many there are, maybe all of them, to show you at that time tomorrow. Because it's that easy to do once you've got a nice, clean structure to this. Unless you've got some really complicated infrastructure that you need to deal with. If you've already got Cucumber set up in your IDE and you've got a Cucumber set up in your continuous integration server, you can literally show them this output, because this is what's going to come out of your continuous integration server. guess what? It reads just like what is you wrote and showed them and got them to read, and they confirmed. It's in their terminology, so they can understand it. They're the audience for the feature file. You just need to have enough structure and be explicit enough to have things like a specific number and a specific outcome, a specific number and a specific outcome. That's what you need from it. What do they need? They need to be able to read it in their own words. And this just gets spit out by the continuous integration server. Now do you see the value? I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see you guys. I got to get over here or over there, some damn place. Here we are.
Siri, stop sharing. Excellent.
There we go. So Rick, Chris, Chada, Brock, excuse me. What are you thinking? Talk to me.
This is cool stuff. I just started looking at some Gherkin stuff with some tests that were written before I came onto the team last week. And so this is really cool to dig in a little deeper and understand where it came from.
Excellent. I'm glad that that's going on where you are. There's much more to the various forms that the Gherkin can take. It can do data tables, which I don't highly recommend unless they're absolutely necessary. You want to keep everything that you possibly can as dirt simple as you possibly can, so that your target audience, who is the customer or their representative, can read it themselves and just get it. And if you can get them to grok it, you know you're on safe territory. So Brock or Chris or Chada, what are you thinking? Are you there? And remember, you can hold down the space bar on your machine and that will toggle. There you go. You have to actually hold it down though, I think. There you go.
Yeah,
Chris.
I'm just thinking of how to translate the complexity of like having a web app and then some requirements and a bunch of data, and then how to get it down to that simple level of a requirement, and how thinking that way could definitely help for sure. But
Okay.
that's kind of what's running through my head.
So I have two recommendations when you say a web app. One, ignore the UI completely. That's not function. That's icing on the cake, not the way it tastes. It's what you want is the JavaScript that's underneath all of that, or the React, or the whatever is the framework that you're using. You don't give a damn whether there's a green border and it's rounded and it's so many pixels wide. That's not function. That's details of the implementation. And what I've seen 100 times before is people who were charged with doing testing, they were the testers. They didn't write the code. They just get the responsibility on the butt end of the project to make sure that it works correctly, right? But they didn't have any involvement early on at all. But what do? They write scripts. Basically, they interview the developers, or they look at the code if they're allowed to. Some of them actually refuse to look at the code because they're of the opinion that they must be independent of the code and not ever see the code, because otherwise they couldn't do black box testing. They have to only see the requirements. Anyway, that's enough silliness in that area. If you get under the CSS and the HTML to the JavaScript that is processing that stuff and tests from there down, things get a hell of a lot simpler. And there's reams and reams and reams of stuff written on this topic. But if you actually want someone to care about whether the green box is in the upper right-hand corner or the upper left-hand corner, and if the border around it is green and the right width, then by all means, use a human being. But if you actually want to make sure that it does what you need it to do, that's functional. And the most common mistake is writing a feature file with all kinds of implementation details baked into the language. Wrong. I don't give a flying fuck if you're actually using a slider or you're talking to it or you're pushing a button. You're making a choice. And that's how it should be articulated. When the user chooses blah, not they slide the button named so-and-so to the left. That's behavior, making a choice. And a result is, and they get their Coke, and if they're standing in front of the Coke machine. You don't care how they selected Coke versus Sprite versus something else. They chose a Coke. They inserted, they paid for it. Maybe with a credit card, maybe with a swipe, maybe with bills, maybe with change. Do you care? The behavior is they paid this amount of money, and that's the necessary amount of money. And then they chose by whatever means the product, and you gave them the product. That's behavior. Do not get wrapped around the axle in the implementation details. Because if you do it at the behavior level, then when someone says, that's great, I'm glad that all the tests on the website are working great. Now do the same thing for the mobile version. Oh, fuck. Now I'm screwed. Because you had all those implementation details that are not the same on the mobile version or on the Alexa version, where none of that stuff is true. See what I mean by behavior-driven development and how it's distinct?
And it's not going to break when you refactor the code because you're not testing the implementation.
Actually, you can use exactly the same feature file for all three implementations, but with different step definitions to trigger it in 1, 2, or 3 ways. That's the magic. You get reuse from your feature file. You're still doing the same thing. It's exactly the same behavior. It's just the details of how you make those choices. That's what's under the covers. That's implementation. And separating those two things out is really hard for a lot of people to get used to. So thank you for that question, Chris. It was a really good one.
I had a scenario where the entire team was trying to figure out what to do. And finally, we just sat down and started writing the gherkin and tied it into the code. And it only took about 20 minutes because as they take a look at, you know, when A and B equals this, we expect to get C. They started to go through that and they go, wait a second. What if this thing, because they saw the data and they were thinking through the Cartesian product and they go, oh, what about this? And what was really neat is when they got, you know, the 10 scenarios put together for all the different conditions they expected to see, and they ran it, they realized the code only missed 3 of them. So they didn't have a whole lot of tests already, but they actually had 7 things working already. They didn't even know the code already supported it.
It's nice when that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Brock, Chada, are you really there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Can you share what you're thinking, what you observed, what you would take away from this?
Well, I was just talking to Dustin before you hopped on. Let me start my video there. There we go.
Thank you,
and,
sir.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I was at a company for 15 years where I was a sole developer. And so testing, you know, we were kind of get it out the door. So testing took a back seat. So I just started a new job where they are very TDD heavy. And so I'm just trying to get a grasp on it right now. So I appreciate any, I'm just trying to get any information from anywhere I can at the moment.
Excellent. So
they've been
what are
very
you doing
good
this
about-
weekend?
I'm doing a online. No, I have 2 weddings to go to this weekend. I was gonna say,
Well, okay. Then you got a better
I
date.
have a wedding on Friday night and a wedding on Saturday and a gender reveal party at the same time on Saturday. So
Yeah, well, I didn't hear anything about Sunday.
Is the
Sunday-
gender reveal happening at the wedding?
say that again.
Is the
Oh,
gender
no.
reveal happening at the
No.
wedding?
It is a separate gender reveal,
Okay, okay.
but there's space in such a way I think we're gonna be able to make it to both. But
So
Yeah,
it
and
sounds
then-
like a
yeah.
fun weekend. The reason I ask is because if you look in the chat, Dustin was kind enough to put a link into the Eventbrite Code Craft Saturdays and Sundays. And it so happens that this coming weekend is our next event, but it happens every month. Besides
okay.
the crazy ass 48-hour thing that I'm doing in November. Or not besides, but that one's going to be done in place of Codecraft Saturday and Sunday for November. Because
that
I'm
sounds
crazy, but I'm not that crazy.
So I guess my question to you would be how do you take someone like me who I don't want to say was backwards thinking, but to try to wrap their mind around this style?
So the best way that I can give you an answer to that question is I wouldn't do it just with you. I would do it with your whole team. If I wasn't already full-time engaged at a large automotive company that has 14 different brands and is based where
Where the
up
Deers
in-
were born?
Yeah, exactly. Not Dearborn, the other one.
Okay.
So anyway, I would basically coach your entire team to work on a work in process limit of 1. Count them on that one finger, 1, all together at the same time. Actually, before I make that recommendation, how big is the quote unquote team?
About 5.
Perfect. That's a perfect size. 4 to 5 is a really healthy size. And there's a very pragmatic reason for that. What you may or may not have picked up on is that I'm talking about something called mob programming. And everything that you could conceivably want to know about mob programming can be found on YouTube with Chris Lucian and Austin Chadwick, who run a mob programming podcast. It's called the Mob Mentality Show podcast. And I've been on it. Dustin's been on it. Quite a number of people have been on it. Those crazy people do it every freaking week. So there's a shitload of content out there. And they talk to K-12 teachers. They talk to titans of industry. They talk to little startups, consultancies, and everybody in between. So, and they actually have, if you go to their channel and you ask /events, I think it is, they have it arranged in themes. So you can find a theme and you can see every single one that they did on that particular theme. It's a great, great resource about mob programming. But this is what I do where I'm hired right now. I went there to do this one thing, mob programming and TDD and BDD and all the like. The reason that it works is because if you've ever been programming on something, or you and your pair partner have been programming on something and you get stuck, what do you do quite naturally? You find someone that you can reach out to, right? Oh, George knows the answer to that question. He did this thing like last week, or he's the expert on that subject or whatever, right? You draw them into the mob. It's a 2-person mob if you're pairing.
Right.
It may just be someone that you go talk to. But that's exactly what happens. And if you already are 5 people, the chances are 5 times as high that you collectively will be able to answer every single question that comes up than any one of you being able to do it at any time for any given question. That's what makes it a superpower. Mob programming actually works because there's virtually no delays in getting answers to questions. In fact, there's two fundamental roles in mob programming. There's the driver and the navigator. You've probably heard these terms if you've heard anything at all about mob programming. The driver is the person who is not allowed to be opinionated while they're the driver. They can be if they're the navigator or just part of the mob. And then the navigator, who is making polite requests of the driver at whatever level is appropriate for the driver's technical abilities. Because you're rotating, that may vary. One person doesn't know this language at all. Another person is a kick-ass ace in this language. Or one person doesn't understand this IDE and another person does. So you may have to adjust your navigation, your request of them to their level of expertise. And you may be able to just say, this is what I think we need to have happen at the level of intention. And they just go to town and they do it because they totally are up to speed in the code base and the language and all that good stuff. Those are all perfectly valid for a driver to do. You give them the instruction that they require to execute on your intention as the navigator. And then after 5 minutes, maybe as much as 10 minutes, you rotate. And now you're not the navigator. Maybe you're the next driver. And now someone is asking you to do things and you have hands on the keyboard. And this hands on the keyboard and a separate person, this comes from a rule called strong style pairing. Strong style pairing came from an experience that almost every developer that was ever a junior developer, which would be all of us, has probably had. Junior developer joins a new team. How are they brought up to speed? If they're not like sent to a corner with a bunch of manuals, chances are they're paired up with someone that has, the senior, the tech lead, whatever, someone that knows the code base, knows the product, etc. And they pair together. And the more senior person in that context is functioning as a navigator, telling them, go here, type this, open this file, blah, 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 right? And everything's working just fine. Until, and this often happens, it doesn't always happen, but it does happen often, the senior person at some point becomes impatient. And they either physically or virtually, depending on if you're in real time or not, or in real space or not, grab the keyboard and say, here, let me show you. And they bang away like a madman for 5 solid minutes because they know exactly what they're doing. And they don't utter a single sound. And then they hand the keyboard back and they say, there, like that. What did you just learn as the junior? One thing. I don't think I want to program with this jackass anymore because he's not very nice. But you didn't learn anything about the stuff you were supposed to learn about in that circumstance. So the antidote to that is quite simply stated in one sentence. In order for an idea to go from one person's brain into the computer, it must, repeat, must go through someone else's hands. That's why there's a navigator and a driver, or a talker and a typist, alternate names for the same things. The guy that's talking, the person that's talking, and the person who's typing. And that's also why everyone rotates, because if you're actively involved in thinking of what to do next as the navigator, or you're actively involved in executing on that request, so you're intimately familiar with the code in order to be able to do that at that moment, and it's going around and around all day long, many, many, many times on the keyboard, many, many times being the navigator. Every conversation between the navigator and the driver is not just a conversation between two people. Because who else is hearing it? If you've got 5 people, there's 3 other people that are involved at some level in that conversation who can say, hey, navigator, I understand what you just asked driver here, Joe, to do, but I'll be honest, I don't know why. Can you please give us some direction here? Where is it you're trying to take the code with that direction that you gave? Now we're having a conversation. That is what strong style pair programming forces open the door on, so that there can be a dialogue, a conversation, a much richer experience. And that's the reason for it. And if you're doing that all day, every day as a mob, or even for half a day, because maybe people just can't handle being that way because they're a bunch of introverts or they're extroverts and they want to take over, whatever the case may be. If you can get to all day doing it with just one thing at a time, the net outcome from that is that every single conversation that takes place is shared. Every single decision that comes from that conversation, those conversations, is shared. Every single execution of the decision is shared. There are no gaps. There's no seams, no missing handoffs, none of that. Because you're all doing it as one. And you're all contributing. So that's what makes this thing work. So guess what happens when you get a new team member and you're doing it this way, in physical space or in virtual space? You ever been a new member of a team? You just joined a team. If you're lucky, you can get in the building because you've already got a card. If it's physical space rather than virtual space. But one thing's almost for certain. You don't know the names of any of your teammates, except maybe the one person whose phone number you got to let you in the building or to email to with questions. So if you're doing it mob programming, as I just described it, physically or virtually, you can literally belly up to the table and in 15 minutes flat, you're learning. And in 30 minutes, there's about a 99% chance that you're actively contributing by having paid attention for 30 minutes to what the hell is going on. You've caught on enough to start asking really great questions. That's contributing. Have you ever been on a team where you were actively that valuable that fast? Or did you have to go read, the logs from the last week, or the call report for the outage report or something like that, or that kind of stuff? No, you're in the pool, but you've got lots of support, and it's all completely egalitarian. You get your hands on the keyboard. When you become the navigator, new kid on the block, like, I've only been here 15 minutes, damn it. You are expected to be willing to say, I don't have any freaking idea what to do next. I think I've got an idea. Let me articulate that and get feedback from the rest of the mob. And they'll say, yeah, well, almost, except maybe tweak it this way. And then you get to provide that instruction to the driver. So you're getting respected and uplifted by your teammates in your very first day. This is why mob programming works when it's being done properly. So when you say, how might you go about introducing BDD? I would do it by saying, hey, there's this experiment I learned about, and it looked pretty cool to me. Let's give it a try. Would you like, mob, to give it a shot? I can show you. And you can use something like this Cyber Dojo, which is designed from the ground up to be a practice area to do that. Completely made up exercises, completely, you don't have to download anything, install anything, do any plugins, configure anything, none of that shit. You just get right to the code. I literally wrote this in the half hour before we started. I kind of cheat because I've done this a few hundred times. But I didn't start with fresh code. I started from ground zero. So that would be my recommendation to you, is do it mob programming style, work in process limit of exactly 1, and get it done. A good friend of mine that I met through Elizabeth Hendrickson, who is my mentor out west, had a habit of saying, so when you ask if something's done and the answer comes back yes, you say it's done, but is it done? Oh, well, yeah, the testing still needs to be done, and the approval process still needs to be done, and the paperwork still needs to be done. So should I ask you instead, is it done? Pretty soon we've got the 1812 overture, right? Yeah. So we've got only one person that I haven't actually successfully challenged. Chris, do you have any thoughts on what you've experienced through this evening?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier the interface thing. You talked through that, which is cool. You guys
Cool.
we were just all talking about mob programming. I have an experience where we did it for several months as a team. We had a BA, me, one other developer, and a QA. And I kind of introduced the idea and we did it. It was kind of cool because we were writing the requirements. We were meeting with the business, and then also like we were doing manual testing at the time, but we would pair along while the manual tester was testing. It was funny how fewer questions and bugs happened, because by the time she went to go test, she'd already been there during the requirements and the coding. And then when she had a question during testing, it went quicker. So I found that to be quite an enjoyable experience. A question I do have is, you talked about there's 2 schools of testing, and with this type of requirement, do you find both are needed, or just this style, or it depends on the scenario, or like what do you advocate for, and kind of what levels much of each kind? Or
Dustin, remind me to thank you, my friend, because these are great questions. Yes, the answer to your question is yes, I do advocate for both, and here's why. The gherkin that's very, very, very intentionally written for the audience of the people who want the thing, it's designed to facilitate that enabling conversation. When you're down in the bowels of the unit testing, you don't have that need. You're talking to programmers. So when you get into the unit testing, going from the bottom up, you don't need gherkin. It's an extra layer that costs you, it takes a little bit longer to run because it has to go through the interpretation of reading the feature file and coming up with the theory about what it should find. And then it finds it and it processes it. So your builds don't run quite as quickly with Cucumber. So you shouldn't do everything with Cucumber. You should do the stuff where it makes sense and you get value from it by making it so that you can show the build output exactly as I did when I showed you the output tab on Cyber Dojo. It said, here's exactly the words that's in the feature file with the values plugged in, so that you can see it, Mr. Customer. You can see every test that's running. You can see every test that's failing. And it's perfectly readable because it's what we discussed on day 1 when we gathered these requirements. That's the value proposition for that, and that's why they are the audience for the gherkin. For us, it's just an enabler. Does that help? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see I see the value with the Gherkin part for sure. I'm just trying to figure out where the TDD adds if there's not a business requirement for it.
I wouldn't mind kind of building off of that to talk about my experience, Chris.
Go
So
for it.
when we had new code, we would start off with the gherkin. We would start off with that behavior. And what that would usually do is it would help us identify what that interface looked like. What was the first interface to the service, for example, right? And we would say, okay, we need that to happen. And then we would cheat sometimes. We would hard code the response in the service to make the gherkin pass. And we go, okay, we think we got the right idea, but we know that code's crap. And then we'd get into the service and we'd pick up the TDD. And then we would start to kind of hit that. And that's when we went through our red, green refactor model. We'd say, okay, so we need to do these things. And we would, unit test that and get it working. And then we didn't like the way it looked. So we'd refactor it and we'd start pulling things out into classes. And as we would do that, we might find that we would keep the gherkin test passing, but you would continue to change that implementation. And I'd done that with the website where we, as Bob had mentioned, we weren't coming in through the UI. We were coming in for what the UI was calling. We were hitting the controller. The controller would call the service, which would call the repo, data access layer, whatever. We would continue to kind of flush those things out and continue to refactor with smaller tests. And then when we were sure we didn't have any hard-coded values in there, we knew that the whole thing worked together. And if somebody wanted to jump in at the data level to say, I really want to hit the database and pull this stuff out and bring it back up, that's fine. But we would keep kind of iterating. So big loop, little loop, but knowing that that big loop answer was the thing that we were always looking for.
So how many people on this call know who J.B. Rainsberger is? Okay. One of his most famous talks is something to the effect of integration tests are a scam, or integration testing is a scam. I'm not sure exactly how it's. Here we are.
Yeah.
So here's
integrated tech.
Yeah.
Integrated tests are a scam.
Yep, that's what he says. Now I'm trying to get him to shut up for a minute so I can actually get the URL and plug it into the chat.
Gotcha.
All right. So, oh God, I hate having my monitors screwed up in this way. I had a sharing relationship and they used...
virus that invades your
Yes. Okay. Now, shut up, would you? All right. God, what is it with this thing? There we go. Now I'm, wow. So at that URL is the YouTube video that you were just hearing snippets from, where J.B. Rainsberger, sometimes referred to as JBrains, because I think that's his Twitter handle, if I'm not mistaken, not to be confused with a company of a very similar name. But what he does, and he actually, I think a year or more later, sort of retracted it, and he said he used the term integrated test, or a scam, and that gets confused with integration tests, which are fine. Because if you've got, let's say you've done your unit testing and you have a unit and another unit that talk to one another. Well, do they play well together? Do they satisfy the contract tests that were made by the two different teams that did this piece and the team that did that piece? Do they play well together? What's their interactions? That is an integration test. But if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stages of pieces that are talking to one another, all strung like pearls on a string, you don't want to do end-to-end testing that goes through all of those 5 things and all of their interactions Because if something breaks, what did you learn? Well, something in there broke. Something did not work the way I expected, but shit, now I got to go find out what. So instead, take each of those interactions, which is what he gets at, where one talks to the other, and fake everything outside of them so that you can just be testing the way they play together. And if you do that, you know beyond any reasonable doubt, because there's also a very small set of things that these two players are doing with one another, and the next pair, and the next pair, and the next pair, however many layers there are. But there's a damn near infinite variety of things that are all the different ways in which you can go end to end through 4 or 5 or 6 layers, right? And that's crazy. You wouldn't want to write that many tests, and you sure wouldn't want to wait for a build to run that many tests. So instead, have stage gates like you do in a continuous integration server that says, do the unit testing. And only if the unit testing works, do you open the gate to now do the integration testing. And only if that works, do you then bother to do the end-to-end testing, which should be very few in numbers, like at the level of smoke test. Because you've already tested the individual interactions. And then there's one more kind of testing that you should do. And you're going to think I'm completely insane, but it shouldn't be automated. And here's what I mean by this. And this is because I'm going to blame it on Elizabeth Hendrickson, because she was my mentor back in 2010 and 11. There's always room, especially if you have made the room for manual testing. And the way that you make the room for manual testing is having really, really fast testing of everything that you can think of. Manual testing is really, more specifically, I should phrase it this way, exploratory testing, not manual testing. That's just the mechanism that you use. Well, exploratory testing is better done by humans because we're experimental animals. We experiment every breath, every day. And what we're looking for is the stuff that no one thought of. Because we've already covered all the stuff we did think of. It's in a test. We automated it. I'll give you an example. This is another example from Dan North. He gave a great talk. He was talking about the mindset of testers and how valuable they can be. He says there's a tester who turned in a bug report that went like this. It was like the most vanilla kind of a thing to be tested that you can imagine. Are all the rules of the password adhered to? And it has all the usual bullshit. Minimum length, mix of different kinds of characters. You got to have at least one of these or that or something else, right? But this tester was really paying attention and noticed that there was a minimum length specified, but there wasn't a maximum length specified. So what did she do? She gave it the minimum length password, and it took that, fine, no problem. And it met all the rules. And then she doubled it by simply copy paste. And again, and again, and again, until she broke it. And the thing that she turned in said, when the password exceeds 32,767, surprise, it crashes the system. It's a denial of service. What? Well, yeah, it crashed the system. It ran out of memory, literally. So that's how being persistent and having the mindset of a tester doing the stuff that nobody ever thought of can be super valuable. There's two guys out on the West Coast, James and John Bach. I think it's just B-A-C-H, no E, unlike Emily Bach or Emily Baish.
Yeah.
So they are rather insistent that what we call tests that have explicit assert values, explicit known outcomes that are being validated, those aren't tests. According to them, those are checks, and they're not wrong. That's exactly what they are. They're checking to make sure that we got exactly what was expected. What they call test requires what they refer to as meatware, the stuff that's between your ears. You have to think in order to come up with genuine tests. And they have some great YouTube videos of taking, what is it, the Office Depot or one of these places that had a big red button that you could press.
Staples.
Staples, that's it, the Staples red button. And oh my God, they went to town on that thing. How fast can I click it? Will it click that many times? And can I click it with a hammer? Can I click it from the side? Can I click it from the bottom? And oh man, they just beat the crap out of that little thing. But what they were demonstrating was all the stuff that no one ever was crazy enough to think about. And believe me, they're the right people to think crazy. So they actually have a structure. James Bach actually came and gave a talk at Elizabeth's consultancy while I was there back in 2010. And they have a process where they will come up with, say, a list of questions that are sort of on the order of a treasure hunt. Now, where James was working at the time, or John, I guess it was, I have trouble remembering which one's which. I can see their faces, but I can't remember which one names, whatever. They were working at eBay, an auction site. And the questions that people were asked to go get the answers to, 1 to 10, were things like, what's the most expensive item on eBay? What's the least expensive item on eBay? What's the oldest item on eBay? What's the newest item on eBay? Well, it doesn't take a genius to figure out the answer to those questions is going to vary probably by the minute at the very least, if not by the second. So they're really not what it's about. What it's really about is that what they were testing was the search mechanisms baked into eBay, because that's what you had to use to get those answers. And that was their particular niche, was testing all the various kinds of searching on eBay. And the objective was, you just try to figure out any old way to get the answer, but the instant you smell something not quite right, you shift into a highly structured, rigid mode. Write down what it was you first noticed that told you something was not quite right here. Capture the exact text of the message, if there was a message. Tell exactly what you did and what you saw that said, huh, that's interesting. And then write down in excruciating detail, what did you do to investigate that? And then what are your conclusions and what are your recommendations for whatever it is that you found? Because there was something about that experience that a human would react to that more than likely was either a misunderstood requirement, and as it produced an unexpected result that a human is what a user would not expect, like an error message, for instance, And that's how they do what they call testing. And they've actually written a book on it. I don't remember the title of the book, but if you look up John and James Bach, B-A-C-H, they have a funny name for their company, Intensify or Extensify or something along those lines. They explained it in detail, and I got a workshop, to my great delight, where we did exactly that. We went on eBay and we answered all those questions. And then as soon as we saw something that looked wrong, which we didn't because they'd been over the ground very carefully, we did find some things, but it was like, no, that's actually the way it works. And here's the fine print that says that that's the way it works. But it's a method that demonstrates if you automate everything that's not nailed down, that you can automate, and that gives you value from automating it, what it does is it creates the space to allow for exploratory testing, exploring the application and finding all the little deep crevices that you didn't know were there. So that's the final stage of testing. And you can do that also by incrementally exposing your actual audience to something 1% at a time, and then 5% at a time, and then 10% at a time. You can put in a policy on a feature flag that exposes a larger and a larger and a larger percentage of a new capability. Look up launch darkly, and you'll see what I'm talking about with regards to feature flags. And you can actually have it set up so that there's a policy that constantly increases it unless you pull the plug on that feature flag. And in that way, you can find out in a safe way where if you're going to piss off some people, you're only pissing off a really small percentage of your customer base. And that acts as a canary. It says, this is a bad idea, pull the plug. And you can do that cheap. And you know that Facebook does that because they used to have, I don't know if they do anymore, they probably don't. They used to have 1 billion customers log on to Facebook every day. So you know they did a shitload of experimentation because they could. I mean, with 1 billion customers logging on, how fast would it take to test a feature? Probably an hour tops. Even if it was subtle. So
And you get
thank you,
that
Dustin,
time
for
to
an
respond.
excellent audience here. Thank you, everyone who's been here. I hope to see maybe some of you, if you can, and if you wish, come up either on Saturday or in November. And that one URL for Codecraft Saturdays and Sundays has all of that silly business that I'm doing this month on the weekend and November. And I think it currently goes all the way out into December. And I tend to keep about 3 months worth on the current schedule. So.
Bob, thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I love this stuff, in case you can't tell.
Yeah, I miss it. I miss just having conversations and forgetting where the time went. So great stuff.